The Week 1 AP poll has officially been released, and we now have an updated look at the top 25 in college basketball after the first week of the season. And in today's video, we're going to be breaking down the AP top 25 rankings, starting at number 25 and going all the way to the current number 1 team in college basketball. But before we jump into the AP poll, if you enjoy the content, please consider dropping a like on the video and subscribing to the channel. And now, let's jump into it. Now, before we get into the actual AP Top 25 poll, I wanted to quickly go over some of the teams that are receiving votes and just missed out on the rankings. And I want to start off with NC State, who once again comes in as the first team out of the top 25 after Will Wade and the Wolfpack went 2-0 this past week and have looked solid to start the season so far. But one of the biggest storylines has been the Indiana Hoosiers, who seem to finally be headed in the right direction after their impressive 23-point win over Marquette. Tucker DeVries and Lamar Wilkerson are playing like some of the best scorers in the Big Ten right now, with each of them averaging over 20 points per game, and the Hoosiers are now just the third team out of the top 25 after receiving only one vote in the preseason AP poll. Another team I wanted to mention was Baylor, who are in the top 20 of KenPom and just picked up a big win over Hans Steinbach and the Washington Huskies this past weekend. And the Bears have two legitimate NBA talents in freshman Tunde Yesufu and Tennessee transfer Cameron Carr, and are looking like they could make some noise in the Big 12 this season. And lastly, there are three teams that I'm also keeping my eye on that are currently unranked, and they are Oklahoma State, Georgetown, and Virginia Tech, as they are all receiving votes for the first time in a while for the AP Top 25. And coming into the season, all three of these teams are flying under the radar, but they each picked up a big win against Power 5 opponents in the first week of the season and could make moves going forward. But starting off the rankings at number 25 is Kansas, and the Jayhawks dropped 6 spots after their double-digit loss on the road to North Carolina and Chapel Hill. And it seems that Kansas has the same issues that a lot of us thought they would, as there is not a lot of offensive firepower besides Darren Peterson. But overall, I do think Kansas has a lot of potential, but Bill Self will need more from guys like Flory Badunga, Bryson Tiller, and Melvin Council Jr., and Darren Peterson will have to continue to perform like a number 1 pick in next year's NBA draft. At number 24 is the Wisconsin Badgers, who stay put after back-to-back double-digit wins against lesser opponents, and this makes sense to me. The Badgers' offense has looked great so far, putting up 96 and 97 points in their first 2 games, and they've been led by junior guard John Blackwell, who has looked phenomenal so far this season, scoring 31 points in their season opener. But my biggest concern with this Wisconsin team is their depth, which should get tested in a few weeks against BYU. Creighton also stayed where they were in the rankings at number 23, as they've only played 1 game so far this season, and Greg McDermott and the Blue Jays won their season opener 92-76 against South Dakota, and the offense looked just about how we expected, with 5 guys scoring in double figures, and Iowa transfer Owen Freeman looked like a solid replacement offensively for Ryan Kalkbrenner. But Creighton will have one of its biggest tests of the season this week when they face off against Gonzaga in what should be a high-scoring affair. Auburn fell 2 spots in the AP poll rankings and could have fallen even more after what was almost a disaster of a debut for Stephen Pearl, where the Tigers found themselves needing overtime to defeat Bethune-Cookman, but Auburn bounced back in their second game of the season, winning by nearly 40 points, and transfers Keyshawn Hall and Keyshawn Murphy have been bright spots for the Tigers so far, but returning guard Tahad Pettiford has gotten off to a slow start, shooting just 30% from the field and less than 20% from 3 in their first 2 games, and Auburn will need Pettiford to get it going here quickly, as they are set to take on Houston this coming weekend. Next is Arkansas at number 21, and the Razorbacks dropped 7 spots after losing by just 3 on the road to Michigan State. And over the course of that game, Arkansas struggled to match the physicality of the Spartans, and their poor rebounding and shooting ultimately led to the loss. But I'm not too worried about this Arkansas team, as Darius Acuff Jr. and Malik Thomas are still the best freshman duo in the country in my opinion, and the Razorbacks have a ton of other weapons around them, and once we get later into the season, I wouldn't be surprised if Arkansas is back near the top 10. At number 20 is Tennessee, and the Volunteers were one of 6 undefeated teams to drop in the AP poll despite starting the season off 2-0, but Tennessee hasn't faced a true test like some of the other teams in the top 25, as both of their wins are against inferior teams. But the good part of this is Tennessee freshman Nate Ament has had some time to adjust to the college game, and it seems to be doing him well, as he is currently leading the Volunteers in both scoring and rebounding with 20.5 points and 8.5 boards per game. And it should be another easy week for Tennessee, but they will have plenty of opportunities against top 25 teams later on in non-conference play. Coming in at number 19 is the Gonzaga Bulldogs, who climbed up 2 spots and are inside the top 20 after a 2-0 start to the season. And Gonzaga has looked awesome to start the year, as they had a 55-point win in their season opener against Texas Southern, and then a comfortable 15-point win over Oklahoma, who a lot think will be an NCAA tournament team this year. And I still think this is too low for the Zags, but they have another chance to prove themselves this week in their top 25 matchup against Creighton. At number 18 is North Carolina, and the Tar Heels are one of the biggest risers in the AP poll this week, as they jumped up 7 spots and into the top 20 of the rankings. And the Tar Heels have to be one of the biggest winners of the opening week with their win over Kansas. And freshman forward Caleb Wilson has had 2 standout performances and continues to establish himself as one of the best freshmen in this year's class. And both of these things have started to get me questioning if North Carolina is actually back and ready to compete. Michigan State moved up 5 places to number 17 after their first 2 wins of the season, including an 80-69 win over Colgate and a 3-point win over John Calipari and the Arkansas Razorbacks. And although the Spartans are undefeated and moved up in the rankings, I still have the same concerns as I did last year with their offensive capability, especially from beyond the arc. And in their win over Arkansas, Michigan State shot just 1 for 14 from the 3-point line, and this will have to change if they want to compete for a national title, in my opinion. Iowa State stayed put at number 16 in the AP poll, even after back-to-back wins by nearly 40 points, and the Cyclones are led by their big 3 of Tamin Lipsey, Joshua Jefferson, and Milan Mankiewicz, and all 3 scored in double figures in both games. But the biggest thing I've noticed from Iowa State so far this season is that they have way more depth than I originally thought they would. Transfers Dominic Nelson and Blake Buchanan have looked solid like I expected, but freshmen Killian Torrey and Jamarion Bateman have been bright spots for the Cyclones and should give them some meaningful minutes in big games. The UCLA Bruins dropped down 3 spots to number 15 in the rankings despite starting the season off 2-0, thanks in large part to their lack of defense, which is a weird thing to say for a Mick Cronin team. UCLA won both of their games in the opening week by less than 10 points, and the offense hasn't been that impressive either. However, the brightest spot on this team has to be New Mexico transfer Donovan Dent, who is leading the team with 16.5 points and 6.5 assists per game. But the Bruins have a chance to move back up this weekend in their matchup against Arizona, which should be their first true test. And coming in at number 14 is Illinois, who jumped 3 spots in the poll and has looked like one of the best offensive teams in the country so far. The Fighting Illini have scored 113 points in each of their first 2 games, although it has been against 2 bottom half teams in college basketball. But the international experiment that Brad Underwood has been doing seems to be working. Illinois has 8 players averaging over 8 points per game, with 6 of them in double figures and 3 at over 20 points per game. And the emergence of Kylan Boswell as one of the best point guards in the country has been fun to watch, but we'll see if this can continue in their matchup with Texas Tech this week. St. John's comes in at number 13 and had the biggest drop in the rankings after their loss to Alabama this past weekend. And although this team seems to have a ton of talent on its roster, there are some major question marks still. The Red Storm majorly struggled to slow down the Alabama backcourt and were forced to play at Alabama's pace, which is just a recipe for disaster for almost every team. And the issue of there not being a true point guard on the roster is still a big concern. But St. John's started the year with their highest preseason ranking in program history at number 5, and they will have plenty of opportunities to climb back into the top 10 during non-conference play. At number 12 is the Louisville Cardinals, who have had a great start to the season as they are 2-0 and have scored over 100 points in both of their games. But the biggest storyline to me is the emergence of sophomore forward Connie Ruths, who is leading the Cardinals in scoring and averaging 18 points and 8.5 rebounds per game. And it seems that Ruths is poised for a breakout year, and transfers Ryan Conwell and Isaac McNeely have also been nice additions, each shooting over 40% from deep as expected. And freshman guard Mikal Brown Jr. is starting to look like the perfect floor general to run the show for Pat Kelsey, and Louisville has Kentucky next on their schedule, which should be one of the biggest games for the upcoming week. Texas Tech actually dropped out of the top 10 and comes in at number 11 in this week's rankings, and the Red Raiders have yet to face a real opponent after their easy wins against Lindenwood and Sam Houston State. But we did learn a few things in both of those games, and that is that Christian Anderson is going to have a huge season, and JT Toppin is back like he never left. In the Red Raiders season opener, Anderson went off, finishing with a 34-point, 11-assist double-double, and then in the next game it was JT Toppin's turn as he had a 31-point, 14-rebound double-double of his own, and the Anderson-Toppin duo looks like one of the best in the country, and we'll see it in a big game this week against Illinois. And just barely staying in the top 10 at number 10 is Florida, who dropped 7 spots after their season-opening loss to Arizona in Las Vegas. And in the matchup, Florida actually got off to a hot start and had a double-digit lead 10 minutes into the game, but then the Wildcats went at the front court and the Gators just had no answer. But Florida had a bounce-back win against North Florida in their next game and are currently sitting at 1-1 on the season. And the biggest question, it seems, for the Gators is, are they going to get enough production from their new backcourt of Boogie Flan, Xavier Lee to make up for what they lost from last year's national championship team? The Kentucky Wildcats stayed put at number 9, but an interesting note is that Kentucky is actually the number 1 team according to KenPom, and the Wildcats are currently 2-0 and won both of their games last week in dominating fashion. And although I think it makes sense for Kentucky to stay where they are with the quality of opponents they've had so far, I still don't understand how AP voters started them out this low. This team is arguably the most talented out of any team in the country, and the scariest part is they aren't even fully healthy. But after their matchup with Louisville this week, if the Wildcats come out on top, I have a feeling they might be finding themselves inside or close to being ranked as a top 5 team in the country. And coming in at number 8 is the Alabama Crimson Tide, who jumped up 7 spots in the rankings after picking up one of the best wins in college basketball so far this season with their 103-96 victory over St. John's. And the Crimson Tide showed everyone in that game that they might have the most lethal backcourt in the sport with LeBaron Philon and Aiden Holloway. And Philon has definitely impressed me the most out of anyone, as it looks like he could be on his way to an All-American-like season. And the biggest question for me has always been the front court, but Aiden Sherrell and more specifically Taylor Bolin seem like a perfect fit for Nate Oates' system and have thrived so far in the first week of the season. BYU moved up 1 spot to number 7 after their 2-0 start to the season with wins over Villanova and Holy Cross, and the trio of AJ Debinsa, Richie Saunders, and Robert Wright III have been leading the way. And AJ Debinsa specifically has been pretty special as a freshman, averaging 19 points, 7 rebounds, and 3 assists. Keba Keita has also been a monster for the Cougars on the defensive end, but BYU is set up for a real challenge in their top 10 matchup against UConn this weekend. But if BYU can win that one somehow, I don't know how they couldn't be ranked in the top 5. Michigan also moved up 1 spot and is at number 6 in the rankings, and they even surprisingly received a first place vote and were the lowest ranked team to do so. But in their blowout win against Oakland, the Wolverines were firing on all cylinders on the offensive side as they scored 121 points, which was the most points scored by a Michigan team since 1990. And the scariest thing about that is that Yaxel Lindenborg didn't even have that great of a game, as he only finished with 12 points, 4 rebounds, and 3 assists. And we'll find out more about this Michigan team this week as they face 2 Power 5 opponents in Wake Forest and TCU. And coming in at number 5 is Arizona, who has skyrocketed up 8 spots into the top 5 of the rankings, and the Wildcats were probably the biggest winner of the first week of the season with their win against the defending national champion Florida Gators. And the biggest storyline from that game was the emergence of Koa Pete, who had an amazing debut for the Wildcats, scoring 30 points, grabbing 7 rebounds, and carrying Arizona to the win alongside Jaden Bradley. And Arizona has looked really good to start this season and have a potential superstar in Koa Pete and could jump even further with a win over UCLA later this week. John Shire and the Duke Blue Devils are next at number 4, and with Florida and St. John's both suffering losses in the first week of the season, it opened up a path for Duke to get into the top 5. But the Blue Devils had an impressive win also, beating a Texas team in their season opener that was receiving votes to be in the top 25 in the preseason. And Duke has a superstar of their own in freshman Cameron Boozer, who's averaging 20 points and 10.5 rebounds on the season so far, and they've looked solid so far to start the year, and being ranked at number 4 seems about right to me. At number 3 is Dan Hurley in UConn, and the Huskies have started the season 3-0 but haven't necessarily played the best competition, but beating any team by 63 points in college basketball is impressive, and that's exactly what the Huskies did in their game against UMass Lowell. Silas Demery Jr. looks like the missing piece at point guard for this team, and the return of Alex Caravan, Solo Ball, and Taurus Reed has been massive for this group, and when 5-star freshman Braylon Mullins returns from injury, they should be just that much better. Purdue comes in at number 2 and drops a spot after struggling during their second game of the season against Oakland, only winning 87-77, and I feel like since their exhibition loss to Kentucky, a lot of people have started to doubt the Purdue Boilermakers, but I still think they're one of the best teams in the country and should have stayed at the number 1 spot. And although it may have been a slower start than most have expected, Braden Smith still looks every bit like the best point guard in the country, and they haven't yet played with preseason All-American Trey Kaufman-Renn, but we'll get our answers soon enough on Purdue as they face off against Alabama later this week. But coming in at number 1 is the Houston Cougars, who have jumped over Purdue to claim the top spot despite receiving 18 fewer first place votes, and this is definitely one of the biggest surprises of the week since Purdue didn't even drop a game. But Houston is one of the top teams in the country and has been a popular choice for the number 1 team by most since the preseason, and Houston has started off the season at 2-0 as well, and we've seen some impressive performances from 2 of their freshmen in Chris Sinak Jr. and Kingston Flemings, and they'll have their first true test this weekend in a top 25 matchup against Auburn. But that wraps it up for today's video. Let me know in the comments down below what your thoughts are on this week's AP top 25 rankings. Was there a team that you thought was ranked way too high or way too low or wasn't even included? Also, if you enjoyed the content, don't forget to drop a like on the video and subscribe to the channel. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.